Brothers and sisters, welcome to Into the Deep, a series of talks, lectures, and experiences for seeking disciples. My name is Sister Angela Marie Castellani. I'm a Franciscan Sister of the Eucharist and serve as the coordinator for lay formation and catechesis for the Archdiocese of Vancouver. And with me tonight behind the scenes is Luisa Gitz, a sister coordinator, and we, along with our entire office and the Archdiocese of Vancouver, wish all of you a blessed Easter season. How wonderful it was for the first time in 2 years to fill our churches during the Triduum and during Holy Week and Easter personally, to be in person together and celebrate the beautiful mysteries of the Easter season. So it was a great joy. I'm sure many of you were able to also attend the liturgies. So the liturgies in the church invites us to celebrate many feast days during the Easter season and solemnities. So together, we'd like to learn more about them and integrate all these mysteries that they are contained in them into our day-to-day life. Today, in a particular way, in the middle of the Easter season, we celebrate the feast of Saint Catherine of Siena. Saint Catherine was a Dominican Saint who, emerging out of the late medieval period, truly embodies the sanctity we're all called to live, to love Christ and to build Christ's church. Saint Catherine was politically engaged while remaining totally surrendered to the truth of the gospel and unwavering in her fidelity to our church. But how was Saint Catherine's prophetic commitment to the church possible in the midst of the political-religious divisions of the 14th century? What does this courageous saint teach us about holiness in today's world? And in this session, with the guidance of Father David Bellusci, we will deepen our knowledge of these wonderful saints and Saint Catherine, especially dramatic spiritual journey, culminating with her encounter with Christ. So we look forward to this session together. Father Bellusci, who is here with us tonight, will also, at the end of his lecture, be open to receive any questions from you. So please ask for questions in the Q&A function of Zoom at the end of the lecture. Father David Bellusci is an assistant professor of philosophy and theology at our local college, Catholic Pacific College in Langley. He's also the author of several books, 7, and the last being on Pier Giorgio Frassati, Truth, Love, and Sacrifice. Father actually has given a lecture on Pier Giorgio Frassati just about a year and a half ago for our Into the Deep series. So we will send that along with you with the recording of this session too, so you can hear Father speaking about a wonderful saint, Pier Giorgio Frassati. Father Bellusci teaches courses in ancient and medieval philosophy, including St. Thomas Aquinas, as well as Christian ethics and scriptures. He holds a doctorate in philosophy and a licentiate in theology from the Dominican University College in Ottawa, where he also taught before coming to Vancouver. Father works in Rome during the summer. He very generously goes and hears confession at Santa Maria Maggiore, giving a break to his brother Dominicans for a little while. He belongs to the Dominican Order, and he was born and raised here in Vancouver, and now he's in residency at St. Mary's Parish. You might have seen this past week a wonderful article that Father has written about a Carmelite community in Armstrong, BC, in the Diocese of Kamloops. So you can read that in our own BC Catholic. So thank you so much, Father David, for being with us tonight. We look so much forward to your sharing.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Sister Angela Marie, for having me here. And thank you to the participants for joining us this evening. So I will go right into share screen so we can start with this great saint, Saint Catherine of Siena. So I just have here my email address. I'll give it to you at the very beginning if anybody wants to contact me with questions afterwards. If you don't manage to get your questions asked or replies, so you have an email address to my college. That's my college email address. As Sister Angela Marie mentioned, the title is St. Catherine of Siena, Medieval Woman, model for us today. And today is April 29th, the feast of St. Catherine of Siena. All right, so Sister Angela Marie mentioned this here. It's basically the introduction to the topic that we have this evening. It's Saint Catherine of Siena, Dominican saint who emerges out of the medieval period. And we need to bear in mind this period. It's the 14th century, and a period in which Saint Catherine was politically engaged because of the church's political alliances that Saint Catherine, as we'll see, was trying to overcome these disputes and conflicts through negotiation. So keep in mind the 14th century, the political element in which Saint Catherine is actively involved in. At the same time, she is surrendered to the gospel. What motivates her is not politics, it's the gospel. And fundamentally, her message is a message of peace. And this is how she is instrumental in this time, being an instrumental figure of peace. And we can ask ourselves, of course, how this courageous woman of the medieval period, what she teaches us today, what we can learn from her, how can we live by her example. So a little bit about her background. Caterina di Giacomo di Benincasa, she was born in 1347, not far from Siena. She was the 24th of 25 children. The father was from a merchant class dyer who was politically engaged. So we can see that St. Catherine Catherine would already have been exposed to the political interests of her father. And Sienese politics at this time range from family conflicts, class differences, and political revolt. So she would have been exposed to this from her childhood. And one thing we discover about Catherine's personality is that she is incredibly independent. She's very independent in terms of the way she thinks, the decisions that she makes. And we can see this from very concrete events in her life. She was subjected to pressure to conform to family expectations, namely that of marriage, which she simply refused. She was very determined to pursue really what she believed God was calling her to live, the vocation God was calling her to pursue. And she did this with, in spite of the family's resistance. And we can see that already in her teens, a time suitable for marriage, that and in the culture of the day, that her decisions were ultimately driven by what was true, right? So truth was this motivating factor in terms of what would lead her to make decisions that she would be committed to. Right, so at 7 years old already, Catherine vowed her virginity to God. When she's 6 years old, in fact, she sees Jesus, her bridegroom, with her own bodily eyes and receives his glorious benediction. This is from the Blessed Raymond of Capua in his works called the Legenda Mayor. Right, so he's, or Legenda Maggiore, the writings of Blessed Raymond are the writings of really her spiritual director who really accompanied St. Catherine for her entire life. So he knew her well. He was also her confessor, a friend, a father figure. Also for Catherine, he would be like her own son. And so he's one of the principal sources of getting to know Catherine of Siena, St. Catherine of Siena. At 15 years old, she opposed her family's wishes for her to marry, and she expressed this by cutting off her hair. And it was a Dominican who made the suggestion, who basically said, if you're serious about not getting married, then make a visible public sign of what you intend to do. Right. So this is from, again, the Legenda Mayor. She now wished to realize, so as to safeguard her virginity, that is to say, to take the habit of the order of preachers friars, whose founder and organizer and father had been the most blessed Dominic. Right, so already she is preparing herself to enter the Dominican Order. Very young, but this is already what she has in mind. She hasn't joined yet, but the family, they are friends with Dominicans. They have a Dominican parish, a Dominican convent just down the block from where they live. So from childhood, she and her family had contacts with the Dominicans, and this was her intention, that she would not marry, but in fact, she would eventually join the order of St. Dominic, the order of preachers. She lived in her room in silence. So the family had a room where she could remain in silence, like a cell, and there she remained in solitude, and she would go out only for Mass for the Church of St. Dominic. So she tried to live already at a young age this vocation in her home, having her own room, living in solitude, and then going out just for Mass. So this happened early in her life. These radical decisions and manifestations of these decisions of hers. So when this virgin, now this once again is Blessed Raymond of Capua, who says this: when this virgin dedicated to the Lord reached the marriageable age of about 12, she began to be kept at home according to the local custom. So already at 12, she would have remained home, but this was the local custom. For in Siena, it is not usual for unmarried girls of that age to be allowed out of the house. Now, the mother, knowing what Catherine's intentions were, got the sister, her name is Bonaventura, got Catherine's sister to try to lead her out of this decision, to try to get her basically to get married. She was trying to find ways of getting her to get married. Now, Bonaventura, Catherine's sister, and Catherine looked up to her. That's why the mother wanted Bonaventura to have this influence in this regard. She was a perfectly good woman from every point of view, but because she had tried to draw one who wished to serve him, all right, towards the world. So notice Bonaventura is drawing Catherine towards the world, while Catherine herself wants to be united with Christ. What happens? Well, God came down heavenly upon her, on Bonaventura, and punished her with death. The sister dies. So this is an indication that the sister was punished for intervening in a matter that involves Catherine's vocation, Catherine giving herself to Christ. And then the sister, with her death, is no longer present, of course, to lead her away from this vocation of hers. On her sister's death, the Holy Virgin, this is Catherine, now seeing clearly the vanity of the world, turned to her eternal bridegroom with greater fervor and desire, and acknowledging her culpability and upbraiding herself, prostrate with Mary Magdalene at the feet of the Lord, she gave herself to tears, imploring him to have mercy on her, praying and pondering on her sin, hoping to hear the words once addressed to Mary herself, "Thy sins are forgiven thee." So what is the sin? Well, the sin is just the fact that Bonaventura managed to bring her out, managed to have her hair kind of fixed, just looking pretty and looking attractive. And this, for Catherine, was at the end a serious offense before God, and this is the forgiveness that she is asking for. Being led by her sister to look attractive, with the possibility of men being interested in her for marriage, right? And she realizes, and here she is saying, she realizes and compares herself to Mary Magdalene, asking for forgiveness. Since there seems to be absolutely no doubt that you wish to serve the Lord, and these people keep pestering you. Now, this is the quote of a Dominican friend of the family. So this is a Dominican here now whom we're quoting, a friend of the family, and he is saying, keep pestering you to do the opposite. Show them you mean what you say. Cut your hair off, and then perhaps they'll keep quiet. So this then is what she does. She accepts the advice as though it came from heaven. Catherine takes a pair of scissors and cuts off her hair to the roots, just as the Dominican had instructed her to do. Having obtained her longed-for freedom to serve God, the Virgin, with admirable celerity, began to direct her life towards serving him. She was given a little room of her own, all right, the room in the family's residence, in which she could pray and scourge herself as much as she liked, as though she were living in solitude. All right, so she was able to live this solitude in her own home. And with what penitential zeal she treated her body, and with what ardor she sought her bridegroom. Consider, for instance, now this is all from the Legenda Mayor, from the first book, the first part. Consider, for instance, her abstinence from food and drink, as had been said above. The Virgin had rarely eaten meat from early childhood, but now, from now on, she would have nothing to do with it at all, and she became so used to doing without it that, as she confessed to me herself, the mere smell of it used to make her feel sick. All right. So we're talking about here, we're talking about meat. Eventually, she just gets sick from the smell of meat, right? So she abstains from meat, and finally, just smelling it makes her sick. She also gradually learned to do without any kind of cooked food except bread, and soon reached the point of living entirely on bread and raw herbs. So we need to remember then, when we talk about St. Catherine of Siena's asceticism, it's very concrete. Sometimes people wonder, well, what is an ascetic? What do they do? How do they live? Well, this is what St. Catherine of Siena is doing. She is not even eating cooked food at this point, except bread, right? She's left meat altogether and all these types of high protein foods, and she's simply eating herbs. And the one cooked thing, we're told, is bread. Now, why does Blessed Raymond of Capua mention this? He says, in the end, it was given her not as a result of habit or natural disposition, but as I hope, God willing, to explain more fully later, through a divine miracle, to reach such a point that though her wasted body was plagued by complaints and subject to labors that to others would never have been able to endure, nevertheless, the vital juices were not consumed within her. And though her stomach would not digest anything, her physical powers were not at all enfeebled by this lack of food and drink. So you know very well, if you have the experience of fasting and your body is not getting what, I mean, people can feel just one day not drinking coffee, how their body reacts, or one day not having meat, you know, what Ash Wednesday is like. So here we have St. Catherine of Siena, who's living this way. And Blessed Raymond of Capua is saying, and what's incredible, what is miraculous, he wants to show this is miraculous, she still has all this strength. And we're talking about strength to meet people. We're talking about strength to talk to church leaders, to talk to government leaders. She has this strength to write. She is writing endlessly, or she's dictating her letters to her secretaries, her followers. But she has this energy in spite of having only, basically, it's bread as her diet, bread and herbs. All right, so this is the church here of Saint Dominic San Domenico in Siena, which would have been not far from where the family lived and where she would have been accustomed to going. So there is this this group of women called the Mantellate, or the Mantellate, who appealed to Catherine as women who were not married. But these women were widowed. They were women who were married, but had lost their husbands. However, they were not married, nor did they seek marriage. So they were women who had been married, lost their husbands, and they had no intention to marry anymore, living under the spirituality of the Dominican Order with a concrete apostolate. So they had a very clear apostolate. They were serving the sick and the poor. Now, the Mantellate, or cloaked women, were made up of, they were intended for these widows, women then who had lost their husbands, and they were affiliated with the Dominican Order. So they took the Dominican habit. They lived and worked under the direction of a Dominican prioress. They served the needs of the poor and sick as directed by the Dominican prioress, and they lived in their own homes. So St. Catherine lived in her own home. They did not belong to the Dominican nuns, the cloistered nuns. They were the Mantellate, lived under the direction of a prioress, but in their own homes, specifically engaged in a ministry where they're serving the sick and the poor. Now, they were made up of widows. The thing is, Catherine of Siena was not a widow, right? She was a woman who basically wanted to give herself to God. She gave her virginity to Christ, and she had no interest in marriage. She's made that very clear, but now she's interested in these women who are guided by the Dominicans. As I said, the Dominican convent and parish was just in their neighborhood, so she would have known them. But she wanted to join them, even though her family were expecting her to marry, and she was technically not qualified, if you want to say qualified. She was not qualified in the sense that she did not fit into a category of being a widow, a woman who lost her husband. So her family resisted, and the Mantellate were not exactly welcoming at first because she did not fit into into this category, which is the condition for joining them. So Catherine has this family that is quite resistant, and it actually reminds me of St. Thomas Aquinas as well. St. Thomas Aquinas, when he wanted to join the Dominicans, he was also met with tremendous resistance, to the point where his family locked him up in one of their towers at Roccasecca, right? Roccasecca, because they were trying to get him to change his mind. There's a whole other story related to St. Thomas Aquinas, but just to say that this type of resistance in the medieval period is not uncommon, and drastic measures that some families would take was not uncommon either, trying to get them to change their mind. We also know with St. Francis of Assisi, the attempts the father had made to change St. Francis's mind. It's the same thing that is happening here with St. Catherine of Siena. But she is she's very independent-minded. She's very resolute in this decision, and nobody's going to change her mind. She is not called to marriage, and she will not marry. It's as simple as that. God has called her to something else. She's already committed herself to Jesus Christ, and this to her is going to be her direction. Now, for the Mantellate, it was not their custom to invest maids, either old ones or young ones, with a habit, and that only respectable widows of a mature age who wanted to dedicate themselves to God were eligible, because they lived no kind of enclosed life, but simply went on living in their own homes. It was essential that they should be people of the utmost respectability, right? So they did not live in what was the practice at the time. Women who joined a religious community joined cloistered communities. That was the practice, right? Cloistered communities. Here she's going to be living in her own home. So they needed to be women with the utmost respectability. Otherwise, what happens is people gossip, right? People gossip, and you want to avoid people gossiping. And this is why they're saying the people need to be of utmost respectability, whom they admit into these Mantellate. But Catherine was eventually admitted to the Sisters of Penance. Her virginity, she had already made the vow, so it's not like she had to make a vow of virginity. This she had made already as a child. Her obedience was to the brother director and to the prioress and her confessor. And at home, she took nothing for herself, but only what she would distribute to the poor, and that was with her father's approval. She also observed silence, except to speak with her confessor, and she lived enclosed in her cell, except to go to church. This is a fresco or a mosaic, could be a mosaic of Catherine receiving the Dominican habit. Okay, and it's from the Sienese artist. His name is Giovanni di Paolo di Grazia. So it was produced only a few decades after her death, right? And here, this is a very nice, image of, Saint Dominic here, who's giving Catherine of Siena her habit, right? So she's got her habit. She's receiving now the black cloak, and that's the name by which they have the Mantellate, the cloaked ones. Having joined the Mantellate, serving the poor and sick with her sisters, Catherine now assisted as a nurse in both homes and hospitals set up by religious congregations. She assisted the destitute and dying, and she buried her own father. Her austerity was radical, complete, and reduced to almost total abstinence in food and sleep, right? Almost total abstinence in food and sleep. So in other words, she even deprived herself of sleep. I mean, instead of sleeping, the normal 7 hours, she would be sleeping, perhaps 5 hours or 4 hours. And this was also a common form of asceticism, kind of what we would call today sleep deprivation. These people seeking sanctity would simply be a form of asceticism. Catherine then learned and taught, including the subtleties of theological argumentation and biblical interpretation, and her experience of the way of God, right? So in attending the Dominican parish, hearing the Dominican friars preaching and teaching, then she herself would have learned, listening to them, these theological type arguments and biblical interpretation. And in 1368, she meets the Dominican scholar Bartolomeo de Dominici, who became her confessor and lifelong friend in 1368. In fact, it's 1374 that she's going to have Blessed Raymond of Capua as her spiritual director and confessor right until her death. So she has, in fact, both Bartolomeo de Dominici and Raymond of Capua. Okay, so her spiritual experiences, Blessed Raymond of Capua tells us that the Lord appeared to Catherine frequently and had long conversations with her. The Lord talked to her like a friend, although at times he brought his Blessed Mother of Saint Dominic, Saint Mary Magdalene, or an apostle. Okay, so Catherine of Siena had frequent conversations with the Lord, and the Lord also brought companions, his mother, Saint Dominic, Saint Mary Magdalene, an apostle. Together they recited the Psalms. In this context of reading the Psalms, Blessed Raymond states that she was not taught how to read. Okay, she could not speak Latin, but she could read the words and say them properly. After pleading the Lord to help her learn to read, she could sing his praises in the canonical hours and canonical celebrations. So this is another fresco where you have the Lord, right, who is accompanying Catherine of Siena as she's reading, all right? She's reading the canonical hours. It says that this is why she wanted to be able to read, and that she eventually learned to read, but the reason why she just wanted to be able to read so that she could praise the Lord in the canonical hours, right? For example, the Psalms. And so here in the fresco, we have her walking with the Lord as she had experienced, as she is reading these canonical hours, as she is worshiping him. We also have this passage here that Blessed Raymond of Capua gives us, while David played the sweet strings on the harp of the Mother of God, took Catherine's hand in her own most holy hand, and presenting her to her son, courteously asked him to marry her to himself in faith. Okay. The Son of God, graciously agreeing, held out a gold ring with 4 pearls set in a circle in it, and a wonderful diamond in the middle, and with his most holy right hand, he slipped it onto the Virgin's second finger. Okay, the Virgin here refers to Catherine. There, I marry you to me in faith, to me, your Creator and Savior. Keep this faith unspotted until you come to me in heaven, and celebrate the marriage that has no end. From this time forward, daughter, act firmly and decisively in everything that in my providence I shall ask you to do. Armed as you are with the strength of faith, you will overcome all your enemies and be happy. The vision disappeared. This was the vision that Catherine had. It disappeared, but the ring always remained on Catherine's finger, and though no one else could see it, it was always before her eyes. In fact, she frequently confessed to me in all humility that she could always see it on her finger, and there was never a moment when it was out of her sight, right? So this is Catherine, who is telling this to her spiritual director and confessor, Blessed Raymond of Capua, okay? And it's in the 3rd chapter of the Legenda Mayor. Blessed Raymond also alludes to St. Catherine of Alexandria. There was also another St. Catherine, as you probably know, St. Catherine of Alexandria, martyr and queen, who was also married to the Lord after she was baptized. Here you have a second most happy Catherine being solemnly married to the same Lord. Okay, this is from Blessed Raymond of Capua. 21 years old, 1368 then, Catherine experiences this ecstasy of her marriage to Christ. And this is often referred to as the mystical espousal. And there are paintings that show this mystical espousal. This is another painting from Giovanni di Paolo di Grazia. And these paintings are wonderful. They're Sienese paintings. He's a Sienese artist. And here we can see this espousal, mystical espousal between Catherine of Siena and Jesus, and the ring that is being, that she is receiving from Jesus. So on your next visit to Siena, make sure you visit the, obviously the Dominican churches where you will find these frescoes, but also it's called the Pinacoteca di Siena. The Pinacoteca will also have many of these medieval paintings in them. 1370, Catherine also experiences a mystical death. She has this 4 hours of ecstatic union with God, and to observers, Catherine's body was lifeless. Okay, lifeless. So a mystical espousal and then a mystical death where the body seems like there is no life in it. All right, this is a very nice fresco here. And you can sort of see the influence of the medieval painter Simone Martini, the way this is done. And this would be Blessed Raymond of Capua, who is writing down Catherine's biography. All right, he is really the primary source for her biography. And this here, of course, is Catherine of Siena. Here she's a saint. We see the halo. So 1374, Catherine went to Florence, and she urged her spiritual director, Raymond of Capua, to follow the dangerous task of attending to the sick and dying during the plague. Of course, who wants to attend to the sick and dying during a plague, because you might get the plague yourself? Now, she was doing this with the other Mantellate, and she was encouraging her spiritual director to do the same thing. Don't worry about it. Yes, you might die, but this is our responsibility. We need to nurse the people who are sick and dying. She showed no fear. This is one of the incredible characteristics of St. Catherine of Siena, as with any saint, is this fearlessness, just not to be afraid. You just put your trust in God, and God will take care of you. And if you die, well, your time has come. I mean, that's all there's to it. right? She's not afraid. She's not afraid to die. She's not afraid to die as a martyr. What's important to her is that she fulfills her responsibility as a follower of Christ. In 1375, while she's in Pisa, you've often, I'm sure, seen the pictures of St. Catherine of Siena with the stigmata. Stigmata, she receives this in 1375 while she is in Pisa. So it's a very specific moment when this happens. It happens in Pisa. And this is again recorded by Blessed Raymond of Capua. And this is, once again, the paintings that we have of St. Catherine of Siena, these most detailed paintings and perhaps the most reliable ones, because these were painted not long after her death, is Giovanni di Paolo di Grazia. This is another one here. Okay, and here we can see the stigmata. This is another one, another very beautiful one of St. Catherine of Siena with the stigmata. You can see her hand. You can see these on the bottom of the painting. You find clearly it's the scriptures, most probably the Psalms, which she read as a way of worshiping God. And you see the lily, clearly the sign of her purity. And this is painted somewhat later by a Spanish artist, a style called Purismo. So significantly later, probably more around the 19th century. Let me just see here. Yeah, 19th century, 1836 to 1873. Right. Again, also very beautiful, beautifully done painting. As you can see, St. Catherine of Siena has inspired many painters to depict these qualities of a mystic who's been stigmatized, who clearly is this, in love with Christ. This is also another very well-known fresco of St. Catherine of Siena. I only have the head here, but you can actually see the full fresco where there's also the stigmata. And this fresco is right in the Church of Saint Dominic in Siena. It's where they have the, it's called the, it's in the Chapel of Veils. So you find the fresco in the Chapel of Veils. It would have been the chapel where these Mantellate would go pray. So eventually, after Catherine of Siena's death, the fresco was painted, and this would have been now a Sienese painter who painted it. Because these are the years. This is the years of the Sienese, Andrea Vanni. Okay, so he would have painted this very well-known fresco that is in the Church of St. Dominic. Okay, so as I mentioned at the very start, Catherine of Siena is living in a very complex historical context. In 1375, she is traveling to Pisa to use whatever influence she has to prevent Pisa and Lucca from joining an anti-papal league. All right, so the church at the time had territories. They owned land. They were papal lands. Think of the Vatican today. The Vatican today belongs to the, if you want, it belongs to the papacy, right? It's the Vatican state. It belongs to it's the Holy See, right? It is an independent state. Think of this state, the Vatican state, being much larger, all right? So it's an autonomous state. The head of state, if you want, is ultimately the Pope. And it is, think of it as being much larger, extending across central Italy from the west, the Tyrrhenian Sea, to the east, the Adriatic Sea. So it was much larger. These would have been papal territories. And these papal territories were on the border with Tuscany. And the people of Tuscany feared that the papal territories would start to encroach into their own republic, right? Tuscany was was made up of these different republics of, I'll show you on the map shortly. But there was this conflict now between the papacy and its lands that were, if you want, encroaching upon these non-papal territories. And this is where the conflict was. Now, how far is the papacy going to go with its territorial claims? So there was an alliance. She's trying to prevent this alliance because it's an anti-papal league, and Catherine of Siena is a great defender of the papacy, and she was basically seeing this as, you know, creating, leading to bloodshed ultimately if Pisa and Lucca joined this anti-papal league, and an alliance that is intended to increase the strength of these anti-papal countries, but not countries, but republics. And she's trying to prevent this. She does not want to see what's going to then surface into a war or another war between the papal territories, involving the papal territories, and these republics surrounding the papal territories. And she says, Christians fighting Christians, this is blood wastefully shed. All right, Christians should not be fighting other Christians, right? Instead, she's saying, you know, you're much better off if you want to spill blood, spill your blood, bringing your converting Muslims. All right. That is, if you want to die, then die as a martyr, converting Muslims. And she was, as all were in the medieval period, they were great champions of the Crusades, right? Not only St. Catherine of Siena, we have another great medieval mystic, Saint Hildegard von Bingen, right? Another great woman, a Benedictine nun, and she too had preached a crusade, as also had Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. So this was a big concern of the period, that the advances being made by Islam. And if Christians are going to battle, I mean, it doesn't make sense battling against each other, battle against those who are, in fact, encroaching and crushing Christian territories. All right, so this was her concern, and this is the context. So in 1375, she returns to Siena. She's concerned about Niccolo de Tuldo, who's a young political prisoner, and she is going to be present at his execution. Notice she goes as far as being present at the execution of political prisoners. She wants them to die with the hope of their salvation, so that she can intercede for them. And the fact that they would see her present, they knew these political prisoners who were going to be executed, they would have her intercession, because they obviously did not want to go to hell. They were being executed. They wanted to have that reassurance of salvation. And so St. Catherine is there at their death to intercede for them. So we have this ongoing conflict between these city-states as well. So it's Florence, Pisa, Lucca, and the papacy. Okay, so we have this attempted papal alliance, this attempted alliance, or sort of a republic, or what they're called. They're called Ghibellines. They were like republican. They defended a republican status for their city-states. These were the Ghibellines. And then the papacy that had its own territories. And you may have heard of the name Guelphs. All right, the Guelphs were those who defended what was called the papal alliances. So this is where we have the conflict, and then Catherine of Siena, who's trying to intervene, trying to bring peace. Her objective is not taking sides. Her objective is bringing peace. She wants to bring the gospel to the people by bringing peace, finding ways of mediating so that there would not be war or conflict, but there would be peace. Florence had been placed under interdiction by Pope Gregory XI. This is one of the big problems, because by having this interdiction, this is like it's almost like, almost like excommunicating a whole city. They're not technically excommunicated, but it's like excommunicating them, because when you have an interdiction on a city, basically they cannot receive the sacraments, nor can the sacraments be celebrated. It's very serious from a Catholic perspective when there's an interdiction that is placed. So the Florentines do not want to have this interdiction imposed on them, because it, in the context of the medieval period, where society, the fundamental fabric of society is their Catholicism and their religious identity. It's unthinkable to have this kind of interdiction. So they're thinking of having this very respected woman, Catherine of Siena, plead on behalf of the Florentines to Pope Gregory XI, which meant that she would have to go to Avignon, because the papacy at this time the seat was in Avignon. It was not in Rome. And she remained focused also on the United Church. So you can see the problems already, right? This conflict between the papacy and this Republican sort of alliance, the papacy that is in Avignon, the interdiction placed on Florence. And St. Catherine of Siena is in the midst of all this, and she's trying to find a way of bringing peace and unity. And she's convinced that she can do it, and she will do everything she can to achieve it. She remained focused on a united church. And right now, at this time, in the mid-14th century, the church is very divided. She trusted the Florentines would comply with the papal conditions, but soon realized her political goodwill was outdone by Florentine ambitions. So they basically used her to their advantage, right? She, had this goodwill of bringing peace. That's what she was trying to do. But the Florentines were basically manipulating her to suit their interests. And the Florentines then sent another ambassador to ensure the papacy would meet the Florentine conditions. Right. So we can see what is going on here. Then these are the papal states. As I mentioned, they extend right across Italy, right to the Adriatic, and they're here from the Tyrrhenian Sea. Rome is over here. And then you have the whole eastern regions here. And okay, so here you have Florence, Lucca, right? Pisa, Siena, all right? And this is where the anti-papal alliance, if you want, the Ghibellines, they were fomenting to sort of push back the advances of the papal armies. And this is where the conflict that Catherine is trying to avoid. Okay, so the Tuscany region involves Florence, Siena, Pisa, and Lucca. Okay, and if you go today, this is a very, very, very beautiful part of Italy. All these cities have tremendous, tremendous history. There are saints, there's art, and so forth. Okay, so you can see then where the papal states are. Right now, it's just this here in Rome, but before it extended right across the country, right across the peninsula. Okay, and this is the area that is at risk in a conflict with the papal states. So after Florence, what had happened, seeing how the Florentines used her, she wrote to them, accusing them of hypocrisy. She wrote a very scorching letter and showing that she was disappointed with their lack of truthfulness. And then she turned her attention to the Crusades. I already mentioned this was a widespread issue, a common issue being dealt with in the medieval period. There were serious problems with the advances made by Islam, and they had to be addressed. And they were addressed in the form of the Crusades. Also, the reform of the clergy, right? Catherine of Siena is very aware of what is going on in the church, and she basically is addressing the clergy at every level, pointing out that they need to make changes, right? Then again, another issue for her that she's addressing is the papacy's return from Avignon, from Rome, to return to Rome from Avignon. And finally, she is going to start a female monastery of strict observance, a Dominican monastery of strict observance. All right, so this is sort of like her agenda when she returns to Siena. These are her projects. Right? She has 4 projects ahead of her. What is the Western Schism about? Well, in 1378, Pope Gregory XI dies, and so there are elections for a new pope. Okay. The new pope who's elected, in fact, he is the Archbishop of Bari, Bartholomew Prignano, and he becomes Urban VI. He was advised by Catherine of Siena to soften his temper. All right, she was concerned that his temper and his way of dealing with the cardinals was going to lose their fidelity to him. She could see what was happening, and she advised him to soften his temper. But 5 months after Bartholomew's election, the cardinals declared the elections null and void. That would be a papal conclave that they declared null and void, but the cardinals did not hold power to declare an election null and void, and Catherine of Siena brings that to their attention. You don't have that kind of authority to declare elections null and void and then to elect a new pope. And they elected a French anti-pope, Cardinal Robert of Geneva, taking the name Clement VII. So there were disputes as to whether this was a legitimate election. Even the universities were undecided and were not even sure how to intervene in the matter. Catherine of Siena wrote that the Italian cardinals, telling them that they participated in an illegal election, all right? Because their majority of cardinals were French, she was not surprised that they would elect a French pope, and she was saying, how could you do this, knowing that this is going to lead once again to the papacy reestablishing itself in Avignon. Catherine herself was perceived as a Guelph because she was a great defender of the papacy. She was seen as being pro-papal, and remember, pro-papal meant defending papal territories, but she was not politically motivated. She's not that she was trying to defend the papacy's territories. She was simply trying to find a solution. She was trying to bring peace between the papacy, the territories, and these other alliances. These, as we saw, these alliances between Florence, Pisa, and Siena. But being considered a pro-papal sympathizer, she was almost assassinated. She was seen as someone who was just defending papal territories, but she was simply finding a way to bring peace, right? Remember, her motivation is the gospel. It's not political, even though it has political overtones, especially in the context of the medieval period. Her motives were fundamentally the teachings of Christ, bringing peace to people. And even though she was almost assassinated, she wept because she was not killed, and she was hoping that she could die as a martyr for the church. She was not afraid of death. This is the faith of a woman who was prepared to die, this kind of courage. Pope Urban VI had summoned Catherine to go to Rome, which she did, and there she had met with popes and cardinals, and she counseled her disciples, she dictated letters. So this is when she was in Rome, she, because Pope Urban VI had summoned her, she met with the Pope and with cardinals, and she counseled the disciples, her disciples, those who were following her. She was the spiritual director of many, many, many disciples, many followers. And then she also dictated letters during this time spent in Rome. In other words, she made maximum use of her time. She did not waste any time. Okay. So we can see here in this map of Europe, the schism between 1378 and 1417. So this is right around the time of Catherine of Siena, right? So this is right around her time. She's going to die, and then there will still be a schism. So we can see those which are the schism involves then Avignon, the papacy in Avignon, and the papacy in Rome. Okay, you have two popes. Remember, you have the one who was elected, Clement VII. This that was not a legitimate conclave, as Catherine had said. You had no right to re-elect a pope or call the elections of the previous pope invalid. So here you have Clement VII, and here Urban VI. And so you have then Europe divided between their allegiances. So we have these parts of Europe who are show allegiance to the papacy, the Roman papacy, and then the others who show allegiance to the Avignonese papacy. All right, so just to look at some of her writings then. The dialogue, which is the primary work of St. Catherine of Siena, she was writing this during the time she was also founding the Women's Monastery of Strict Observance, not far from Siena. And she began writing in the autumn. And it was both dictated when she was in ecstasy and also written by her own hand, as she had just learned to write. Okay. The work was most likely completed before she was called to Rome in 1378. Remember, Pope Urban VI called her to Rome, and before the Great Schism. So you can just see how the dialogues, this is the division. It's based on, this here is based on the dialogue that I have, Il Dialogo della Divina Provvidenza, that was published in Siena. Okay, so the preface is the first two chapters. Then you have chapters 3 to 12 on charity and discretion as the norm and essence of perfection. Chapters 13 to 24, the mystery of salvation, the plan of God. Chapters 25 and 30 to 30, the Word made man, bridge to truth. So this is a central chapter here. The Word made man, bridge to truth. The whole section involving the bridge, the Word made man, Jesus, basically the bridge. Okay, so the river that overwhelms the battle against evil, the ways of perfection, laws and virtue, treatise on prayer and the states of the soul, doctrine of tears, 3 lights to reach perfect purity of spirit. So all of this here is going to, it's really the central part of the dialogue, which is the bridge. Okay. Then she looks at divine government in the world and the church, the mystical body of the Holy Church, scandals of the clergy and their consequences, and then she has this treatise on divine providence. Okay. In the prologue, we see she already talks about 4 petitions that she has, and she mentions this at the opening of the prologue. Sort of what am I doing in this dialogue? Where is the dialogue leading us? What is the purpose or the object, if you want, of the dialogue? And she says that ultimately there's a petition for herself. This petition for herself is about the need to grow in virtue. Okay. Then the second is the reform of the Holy Church. Okay. This is another theme that is central to her work. Then this general theme on the whole world. Then a particular theme, the peace between Christians who are rebelling against the Holy Church and the disrespect and persecution of the church. And then the 4th petition which is divine providence, and the particular case that she possibly had in mind, as I mentioned earlier, Niccolo di Tuldo, this political prisoner who is facing execution. All of these themes then, petitions, are what make up the dialogue. Okay. So the bridge, as I mentioned, is central. It's from chapters 25 to 86, reflecting the significance of the dialogue. And it is based on 3 stairs. The bridge, 3 stairs lead up to the bridge. And people also can cross the water beneath the bridge, right? But everything that is beneath the bridge, crossing, instead of crossing by the bridge, crossing by water, basically, these are all the people who are led to death and ultimately hell, right? So basically, you do not want to be under the bridge. Quite literally, you want to be crossing the bridge and going up the steps that lead to the bridge. So people who choose between 2 ways of crossing the bridge, there's the ordinary charity. So basically the ordinary life lived by the baptized person who would then be going to purgatory, and then perfect charity. So at death, you are simply trusting in the blood of the Lamb. And then this 3rd stair, right? Because you there taste peace. So I won't read the whole thing here. I would encourage you to buy the dialogue and read it. It's definitely a worthwhile spiritual reading. But notice she says here, so the bridge has 3 stairs, and you can reach the last by climbing the first 2. The last stair is so high that the flooding waters cannot strike it, for the venom of sin never touched my son. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen this painting. When I was looking for a painting of a bridge, Jesus as a bridge, this is what came up when I was doing an internet search, a Google search. And I was trying to remember where I'd seen it because I knew I saw it. And then I realized that we have this painting in our office at Catholic Pacific College. And I thought, oh, I know where I saw it. I saw it. We have it in our office. And I never made the connection between St. Catherine Siena's bridge and this painting. So the Christ is our bridge to heaven. The painter is Elizabeth Wang, 2020. But I was, when you look at this painting, you need to also keep in mind where there would be differences with what Catherine of Siena has in mind, because the bridge that she has in mind really starts from the ground, right? Because she will speak of the feet of Jesus, of the heart of Jesus. We're basically going up the bridge, up the stairs by going up to, basically Jesus is literally his body is our ladder, right? So we're moving upwards. This here would probably represent that 3rd step where we're actually, where, as Catherine of Siena says, the water can never reach this point because sin has never touched Jesus and could never reach this point. And so this is the part where you taste peace, right? You're basically, you're going into heaven at this point, but you would be able to go up, right? You would go up the steps and then finally have this last part here where you're walking into heaven. And of course, the water below, nothing obviously of a sinful nature cannot touch Jesus. So the water below, where people are below in the water, this is where there is sin and death, right? So there's no way Jesus can be in the water, right? He would have to be, the bridge would have to have Jesus extended across the water. So we go literally across Jesus as a bridge, right? He is not in the water. Those who are in the water basically are those who are in sin. So we're avoiding going into the water by having these steps going up Jesus, who is our bridge. All right, I'll read this here because it's quite important as far as looking at trees. I made them trees of love through life of grace, which they received in holy baptism. Which they received in holy baptism. Okay. But there are trees that have these death-dealing fruits, and these death-dealing fruits are sins. Some are food for beasts. These are people who live indecently, using their bodies and minds like pigs rolling in the mud, for that is how they roll about in the mud of lust. So there are good fruit and there are bad fruit. And the bad fruit are trees of death. The good fruit are the fruit that God has given us and God has created, but the bad fruit are the result of our sins, right? Where there are bad fruits, that's where there are our sins. And she says, right, the food that is for beasts reflects those who live indecently. O brutish souls, what have you done with your dignity? You who were created kin to the angels have made ugly beasts of yourselves. You have stooped so low that even the demons whose friends and servants you have become cannot stand the sight of such indecency, and much less I, who am purity itself. All right, so she is referring to God when she is writing here. No other sin is so hateful and so dark the human mind as this, referring to lust. The philosophers knew this not by the light of grace, since they did not have it, but by the natural light, that this sin beclouds the mind. So they were continent, the better to be able to study. So she's basically saying even philosophers who did not have grace because they did not know Christ, she's probably thinking of Aristotle, they were able to be, they knew what it meant to be pure so that their minds would not be clouded, so that they could properly study. Now, what about the Christians? And they cast aside wealth so that thought of material things would not clutter their hearts. And she says here, just raise this, but no, so the foolish false Christians who have lost grace through their own fault. So the importance of this passage is, notice her language. She is very direct. She is not, there's no politically correct language here. She's calling things by their name. Right? You behave like pigs and you call yourself Christians. This is what she is saying. Now, I'll move into this last section here. There's not very, okay, I'll just move into this last section. Once when she was praying to the Lord with the utmost fervor, saying to him, as the prophet had done, create a clean heart within me, O God, and renew a right spirit within my bowels, and asking him again and again to take her own heart and will from her, he comforted her with this vision. It appeared to her that her heavenly bridegroom came to her as usual, opened her left side, took out her heart, and then went away. This vision was so effective and agreed so well with what she felt inside herself that in confession, she told her confessor that she no longer had a heart in her breast. He shook his head at this way of putting it, and in a joking way reproved her, but she repeated and insisted she meant what she said. Truly, Father, insofar as I feel anything at all, it seems to me that my heart has been taken away altogether. The Lord did indeed appear to me, opened my left side, took my heart, cut, and went away. Her confessor pointed out that it is impossible to live without a heart, but the Virgin replied that nothing is impossible to God, and she was convinced she no longer had a heart. One day she was in the Church of the Preaching Friars, which the Sisters of Penance of St. Dominic in Siena used to attend. The others had gone out, but she was praying. Finally, she came out of her ecstasy and had gone up to go home. All at once, a light from heaven encircled her, and in the light appeared the Lord, holding in his holy hands a human heart, bright red and shining. At the appearance of the author of light, she had fallen to the ground, trembling all over, but he came up to her, opened her left side once again, and put the heart he was holding in his hands inside her, saying, "Dearest daughter, as I took your heart away from you the other day, now you see I'm giving you mine, so that you can go on living with it forever." With these words, he closed the opening he had made in her side, and as a sign of the miracle, a scar remained on the part of her flesh. As I and others were told by her companions who saw it, when I determined to get to the truth, she herself was obliged to confess to me that this was so, and she added that never afterwards had she been able to say, "Lord, I give you my heart." Okay. This is very, very powerful experience of the heart of Jesus. And there's this beautiful painting. St. Catherine of Siena exchanges her heart with Christ. And this is the same Sienese painter, Giovanni di Paolo di Grazia, okay, right? Based on this passage, where she exchanges her heart with that of Jesus. So 1380, Catherine could not swallow food or ingest water. She continued to drag her body to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome each morning for Mass, where she remained until Vespers. Catherine offered herself in prayers as all her pastoral activities ceased. By February, she was no longer capable of using her legs and was confined to her bed. April 29, 1380, Catherine died. She was 33 years old. So in this last part, we can see this painting. This is a 16th century painting, an Abile Carracci, Bologna, Rome painter, and this is St. Catherine in ecstasy before the cross. All right, so all right, so when we speak of Catherine as a model for us today, let me see if I can just put this up here. Right. All right. So we're not in the 14th century, we're in the 21st century. But let's begin with truth. She makes it very clear that truth is her starting point, the intellect. So we can know, this includes self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is fundamental to know our strengths, to know our weaknesses. This is the only way we can come and grow in sanctity. And also then to know what is truly lovable, what is meant to be loved, what is a true object of love. And therefore, when we follow our will is followed to what is, in fact, something meant to be loved. At the personal level, Catherine of Siena, we've seen she's engaged in forms of penance and mortification. She does this for the love of Christ. She does this for the love of others. She offers her penance and mortification for others. She's directly engaged with her society, and her primary source of information is her letters. She has over 300 letters which she has written in reply to different segments of society. So she's directly engaged. Also, we've heard about her concern, her visit, her time spent with the poor, the diseased, the dying, being an ambassadress, being a counselor, counseling people. The time we had as Vicar of Christ, Pope Gregory XI, then Pope Urban VI. She was there for the Florentines to negotiate with them as a mediator for the church. She visits the Pope in Avignon. She visits the Pope in Rome. So in the 21st century, how can we learn from her as a model for us today? Well, at the personal level, how about simply coherency in our vocation? All right, whether it's marriage, single life, religious life, the priesthood, being coherent. What is my vocation? Well, to live it with coherency. This goes back to truth. to love, but you love in truth. So coherency in the vocation. This way we are faithful to Christ and to the people. At the social level, all right, she was directly engaged through correspondence. At the social level, we today, we need to be reading, listening, doing research and discerning. We have natural law to help us. We have our conscience to help us. We have scriptures to help us, the magisterium to help us. Okay. And this allows for, as an act of love, truthful social engagement. Truthful social engagement. All right. This is going to be the basis of it, for truthful social engagement. Today we have, as the Vicar of Christ, Pope Francis. What are the issues of today? The issues of today are preborn babies, sexuality, marriage, the family. We read every day about the Ukrainian-Russia conflict, the issue at a more local level, the indigenous residential schools. These are the issues that that confront us today. How do we respond to them? How do we respond? Catherine of Siena was not afraid to respond. She engaged in all of this, right? In all of it. And we have, as our means of engaging today, what we know from scriptures, from the magisterium, from natural law, from the conscience, from what we read with discernment, listening with discernment, doing research, all right? So we can today live this vocation, St. Catherine of Siena's vocation. We can live this today, right? But we need to have this truthful social engagement, right? It needs to be truthful, just as she had truth as a starting point. Only in truth then can we truly love, right? We are called to love. So I will end right there. I'll stop share.
Thank you very much, Father Bellusci. What a wonderful overview of St. Catherine's life, and so much to say. And your last slide, especially, that brought together some of our current challenges and how she can truly be a model for us. Now, brothers and sisters, we have a few minutes left. There are a couple of questions that have come up. If you have a few in your heart right now, please put them in the chat box. And again, I have put into the chat box also Father Bellusci's email address, as he very generously offered that at the beginning of our webinar tonight. So, Father, maybe we'll go through a few questions for you. Earlier on, you mentioned how St. Catherine came across a lot of resistance in following God's will. So when we encounter resistance, how can we know if it's an invitation to push forward or a closed door from God? How can we discern that?
Well, that's a good question, because it's a very real problem, right? A person who desires sanctity clearly wants to do what is right. And it really is through a reflection on the scriptures. I think this is where we need, and this is what St. Catherine was doing. She was reading the scriptures. She was also turning to her confessor. She was turning, who was also her spiritual director. So we have different means by which we can find the answer. First of all, we need to be sure that what we desire is sanctity, because ultimately the will of God is our sanctification. This is one from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. It is our sanctification. So in that discernment, is that leading me to greater holiness? Then we have the scriptures that are there to help us in that discernment process. We have a confessor, a spiritual director, and together this discernment process would help us make the right decision. But the decision needs to really be built on what is going to help me grow in sanctity, because that is what God asks of us, is sanctity.
Thank you so much, Father. And one of our attendees says, can you please elaborate what you meant by coherency and vocation? and what we can learn from St. Catherine.
All right, so vocations are different. Being a priest is different from being married. Being a single person is different from being married and being a priest, or being a religious sister or religious brother. A person needs to look at their vocation, and because vocations differ, they need to say, okay, well, what is my vocation? So let's just say you are a married person. Well, the married person has a responsibility to his spouse and to his children. So being faithful to his spouse, not just in the sense of being monogamous, but being a loving, supporting, nurturing, caring spouse. And this is also true for as a parent, right? It's the same thing. You need to, and that is coherency with the vocation of being a parent. You are there, first of all, to be a parent to your children as you are a spouse, right? That's what the coherency is. If you are a religious, then coherency is that you observe your vows, right? So the vows of poverty, obedience, and chastity. That's coherency. You make a statement before God, before the community. This is what I promise to live. Then being coherent is that you are living that. You are living that.
Thank you so much, Father. A question about St. Catherine's mortification actions. So in today, our attendee asks, 2022, we can fast and pray and make personal sacrifices. So where does the scourging fit with respect for the human body and our responsibility to care for it?
Right, I think something like that, really the person needs to address it with their spiritual director, because people are very different. So I could say, you know what? I mean, a good thing to do is reduce your sleep to 5 hours a night, right? And someone might say, well, 5 hours a night, I mean, I will not be able to function in the daytime. So it's very difficult to make these type of statements as to what would be good, what would not be good. People are very different, and that's the whole reason why you have a spiritual director. The spiritual director who knows the directee can say, well, you know, you're going to have problems because, you know, you're married and you have children and you need a certain amount of energy to be able to carry forward with your family and your family responsibilities. So sleeping 5 hours might not be the best thing for you, because you're not going to be a very happy wife or a very happy mother. So you need to look at other things that could be done. Take, for example, that I think could be applied almost universally, which would be cutting down time on texting, on Google searches, on social media. Okay, I think that is an area where it would be very difficult to justify spending hours on social media. And it's very easy for hours to be spent on social media. You know, this natural reflex, every 15 minutes, checking the phone for messages, checking the phone for, you know, I mean, this is an area where I think we could today say, all right, be conscious of the amount of time you're using doing searches, texting, social media. Reduce it to max 1 hour a day. All right. And there is no excuse. I mean, people do not have excuses for using you know, the social media or texting for more than 1 hour a day. That's an example where I think it could be applied without any rationalization that, oh, I can't live without my you know, doing my Google searches every 15 minutes or checking my text messages every 2 minutes, right? And it's incredible how people just really have a problem. It's you know, right across society, it is a serious problem, and that is something that needs to be corrected. So if you want to start somewhere, start with how you are using your phone.
Thank you so much, Father. So practical and so needed. Absolutely, that limitation and of social media for all of us. it's so easy to get caught with it. They're made to be very addictive too, so we fall into it.
Right.
Father, you also mentioned that the saints are not afraid. So how can we move from fear to true confidence in God?
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about the saints, and that's why I personally love reading about them, is just this fearlessness about them. I think that fearlessness reflects the depth of faith, right? I think fearlessness and faith, or if you want, courage and faith, go together. I think the greater the faith, the more fearless we become, because what is there to be afraid of? When you have faith and you know that, we can think of many saints. I have many on the top of my head, but just many saints, they're just waiting to be united with Christ. Death, they're not afraid of death at all. I just want to be with Jesus. That's the attitude. And so this is why they're not afraid of martyrdom. This is why they're not afraid of, St. Catherine was telling, her spiritual director, go out and help them. Sure, there's a plague, but go out and help them. I mean, that's what you're supposed to be doing, right? There are diseases there. They're waiting for people to nurse them. She's telling her spiritual director, right? So I think it comes down to growing in courage. Really comes down to growing in faith, because the two go together, right? Really growing in faith and asking God, if a person is lacking in courage, which means they're probably lacking in faith, asking God to strengthen their faith.
I love that. Growing in courage and growing in faith going hand on hand. So that is wonderful. Father, two other questions before we say goodnight to everyone and to you too. But the first one is, what is the best translation for the dialogue? What would you suggest?
I have one. I think this one is pretty good. The Western Classics. It's translated by Suzanne Knopf. She's a Dominican. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a fairly standard version. Also, the way she has it, she has all the chapters written out, so you can follow the dialogues based on the chapters, based on the parts. So I would certainly recommend this. But I also would really recommend Blessed Raymond of Capua. I mean, this is beautiful. He's her spiritual director, so he really has this. He knows her. He writes about her journey. I mean, it's beautiful. Blessed Raymond of Capua, the life of Saint Catherine.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you, Luisa, for putting the information on the dialogue on the chat, so you can see. Luisa put the Amazon link for you to find what Father has suggested. So we'll close with this last question. One of St. Catherine's strength is her courage in speaking out, especially when she saw what was wrong. And so how do you think she would view the balance of being vocal and being obedient at the same time in our world today?
She was vocal because she was clearly confident, but that confident came from a combination of factors. First of all, just her relationship with Christ. It was when you have a relationship that is as intimate as hers, as far as she was concerned, Christ was on her side, right? So when you know that Christ is on your side because you have this intimate bond with him, then that gives you the confidence to be vocal, but being vocal because you are bringing the word. She wants to bring the word of Christ ultimately to the people, right? So she's not afraid to bring the word of Christ to the people. This is ultimately her mission. She sees this as her mission, and so she's not afraid to do that.
Thank you so much, Father. We'll share with our attendees some of our upcoming events, and then if you will be so kind to offer maybe a final blessing before we end our evening today. But thank you so much for being with us.
Okay, thank you very much, Sister Angela Marie.
You're welcome.
I have actually this prayer for the Feast of St. Catherine of Siena.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay, in the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
O God, you made Blessed Catherine burn with divine love in her meditation on the Lord's Passion and in the service of your church. Grant by her intercession that your people, sharing in the mystery of Christ, may always rejoice in the revelation of his glory. Through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
I will give you a blessing. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you so much, Father.
You're welcome.
And for all of you who have been with us tonight, thank you for participating in this event and to always faithfully joining us for Into the Deep every last Friday of the month. We will meet again on May 27th. The topic is being worked out. Hopefully we can communicate it soon, most likely in the next few days. But coming up, again, you will find presentations in relation to the issue of wokeism. So Awake from Woke, #1 session, Understanding Diversity, Equity, Inclusivity, and Social Justice on May 2nd, this coming up Monday. And the second presentation, Awake from Woke 2, will follow on May 16th. How to talk about diversity, equity, inclusivity using the Catholic Voices method. So those presentations are given by Peter Nations from Catholic Voices. A great opportunity also is coming up at St. Anthony of St. Anthony's Parish in West Vancouver from May 7th to June 18. There every Saturday at 7 o'clock. The Life in the Spirit seminar will begin. Please join the parishioners at St. Anthony's and all men and women of good faith that will like to learn more and share in the knowledge of topics like God's love, God saves us, new life, receiving God's gifts, receive the Holy Spirit, growth and transformation. On May 8th, we will also celebrate all the milestone marriages with Archbishop Michael at St. Clair's Parish. And then join our families as we celebrate a day of fun, most likely in the middle of June. So hopefully you can all join us. So many opportunities to pray and celebrate. And lastly, Father Bruce John Hamilton is journeying to the Holy Land. So please, if you considered embarking on a pilgrimage, join Father Bruce John Hamilton from Corpus Christi Parish. The pilgrimage will begin on June 20th to June 30th. What a wonderful opportunity after especially this pandemic time that we're able to return to the Holy Land, the land that has seen Christ's birth and Christ's preaching, Christ's mission, and of course his death and resurrection. What a great opportunity to grow in our faith and journey with Jesus in his own land. So thank you again to Father, the prayer, the Padre Pio prayer group. So Father Bellusci leads the Padre Pio prayer group out of St. Mary's Parish. And this coming up month on May 14th, the topic is Charity from Sweet Talk to Real Action. So as we send out the recording of Father Bellusci's presentation, we'll also add the information about all those events coming up for you. So thank you again to Father for being with us. And thank you to all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Good night, Father Bellusci. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thanks. Good night.